Rosewool by Luis Lopez. Nora Shinders awoke from the usual disturbing dream, and though she knew the room to be empty, some insecure part of her could not help but glance around. She was alone. The sky, her only companion on nights like these, was black and still through the second-floor window. Nora got out of bed and straightened her nightgown. She opened the window and breathed in the autumn air, letting it chill her lungs and drive away the remnants of the dream. A solitary crow cried into the night. Nora knew that it was a crow not by the sound, but because they were the only birds that flew overhead these days. She turned back to the bed. Gerald's side was undisturbed. It was much too late for him to still be working. She leaned her head out the window and saw a light on in the barn. Perhaps Lola was finally calving. It was rare that Nora got to see one of her animals give birth, and it was Lola's first, so she went to the closet and grabbed one of Gerald's jackets and a pair of his boots. The stairwell from their bedroom was lined with old pictures, Nora sitting down at a large table with other women all in red hats, Gerald standing in a small fishing boat holding a bloody striped bass, a young Nora leaning on the railing of a hotel balcony overlooking Molokai. Gerald had taken that picture just minutes before asking her name, and only hours before a frenzied, sweetly rough round of sex in a bathroom stall. He had been 34, she 25. Now their marriage spanned 31 years. There were no children. On the bottom step, Nora sat down and looked at Gerald's boots. God only knew why a 65-year-old man had insisted on a pair of candy apple red cowboy boots, but he walked out of the store that day with a smile on his face. She put the boots on, noting that they were several sizes too big for her. They squeaked as she stood up. Gerald had not quite broken them in yet. She put on his jacket and realized that she must look a little like a madwoman standing there in an oil-stained corduroy jacket that concealed only half of her faded blue nightgown and those bright red boots. Yet nothing else would be so comforting, for they were his, and he was hers. Nora crossed the hall and found the answering machine. Neither her nor Gerald would be caught dead with a cellular telephone when standard land-based phones were still perfectly good. Nora also had a telephone in her office at the university. If someone really wanted to talk to her, she could be reached one way or another, and no expensive, cancer-causing electronic devices would have to be involved. And if she had a cellular telephone, she would be pressured into giving her number to her students in an effort to be progressive. That was the latest thing buzzing about the university, and everyone had to be progressive. But in doing so, Nora would no doubt be the 3 a.m. recipient of countless drunk mass text messages every Halloween, New Year's, and St. Patrick's Day. It was just easier not to have one. Their home answering machines served quite nicely as a way to leave little notes for each other. Sometimes the notes would not be heard until much later than they were intended, but that was the sole drawback of resisting the societal toilet that was the cell phone craze. Nora pressed the button on the machine. "Hey, darling, it's Gerald. Your husband." He never needed to say that. Who else would it be? "I guess you're at work. I'm gonna be home kinda late tonight. That Stephen Denton's got a load of grass seed that I've been meaning to pick up, but he's only available around 8 tonight. The prick. I bet he's gonna be at that strip club in the city till then. What's it called? Peppermint Giraffe? Something. Anyway, once I get home, I'll see to Lola. She looks ready to pop. Probably gonna be tonight or early morning, so I won't get to bed till after that. But don't you worry about coming out and seeing her tonight. You'll get a good look at the new edition tomorrow morning. You know, once it's cleaned up a bit and not covered in yogurt. Guess that's it. Love you, sugar butt." Gerald had then tried to hang up the handset, but had evidently struggled. The sounds of plastic hitting plastic and garbled obscenities echoed from the speaker. There was a click, and the machine beeped. "He wants me to stay inside," Nora said. "How sweet. To hell with that." The wind picked up as Nora crossed the darkened gravel to the barn in the distance. The large doors were cracked open. A slash of light illuminated the ground like a scar. She pushed the doors open a little more and stepped into the low amber light. Old hay crunched under her feet as she drifted through the vast interior of the barn. She was always surprised at the sheer size of it, despite having designed it with Gerald. Really more of a multi-purpose hangar, the barn was separated into many segmented stalls and vaguely resembled a beehive. Nora and Gerald had sunk quite a bit of money into an artisan cheese and milk operation years before. They wanted to try their hand at the homegrown lifestyle, maybe sell blue chicken eggs or something. The venture never panned out, but they got to keep the barn. These days they didn't care for so many animals, but Nora had insisted on keeping sweet-tempered Lola, as well as some others that remained unnamed. "Gerald? Honey?" She spoke into the dark. Nothing. Nora checked in Lola's stall, but the cow was absent. Maybe Gerald had somehow moved her to a bigger one. Certainly no birth had taken place here. The soft shavings on the floor had not been soiled. She went further into the barn. A fluorescent light bulb in a low-hanging socket had been shattered, and glass shards littered the ground. It must have happened at some point while Nora was at the university. Why had Gerald not cleaned it up? With how late it was, he had been home for quite a while. Maybe he didn't get the chance to in the rush to move Lola. There weren't many stalls remaining now. As Nora neared one, she heard the familiar thump of Gerald's work boots. A smile lit her face. She rounded the corner and saw her husband's back and broad shoulders. He was kneeling over a lamb that lay on its side. The lamb was not supposed to be here. This wasn't its stall. Its legs kicked and it bleated with wide, staring eyes. It struggled to stand, but Gerald would not let it go. One calloused hand was at the lamb's throat. Some of its wool was stained red. Gerald's head jerked from side to side, and the lamb bleated desperately against a ripping, tearing sound. A spiderweb of veins erupted in the animal's eyes, pulsing with the sudden load on its heart. It thrashed wildly, scattering hay and wood shavings. Its oval pupils ratcheted between contracted and dilated, and the creature screamed a final time before its eyes rolled up into its head, and it collapsed. Gerald bent his head to the lamb's stomach and tore again. A pool of candy apple blood began spreading around his boots. A soft, wet crunching echoed off the walls of the stall. The lamb's leg twitched again in death before Gerald brought it to his mouth and Nora heard a moist cracking. "Gerald?" she squeaked. Her husband looked over his shoulder, and Nora saw that his once green eyes were tainted with red. He stood up, and Nora took a sharp intake of breath. His flannel shirt was in tatters across the belly, and a large portion of Gerald's stomach was simply gone. Some of his intestines dangled freely, pale and dripping. She trembled. She wanted to move, but couldn't. Her bladder let go. Gerald drooled and took a labored step forward. Small bits of meat and wool shone from between his teeth. His face was adorned with a red beard of blood. Still, Nora's legs would not move. "Gerald, honey, oh God." She wept openly as what was left of her husband began walking toward her. His wet work boots squished with each step. His arms came up, fingers curling and reaching. Nora managed a small step back, and then her legs would move no further. He quickened his pace, and Nora closed her eyes, shaking uncontrollably. She felt his presence, felt the heat coming off his ruined body. She was roughly bent, exposing her collarbone like he had in Molokai, and for the smallest moment she felt the teeth touch her skin. Her scream filled the barn, as somewhere overhead a crow flew off into the night.